Thank you for joining us. My name is Mahnaz Charania. I'm a senior research fellow with the Clayton Christensen Institute, and I have the privilege of moderating today's session with these amazing panelists on mentorship, social capital, and work-based learning. And in my work, I get access to a ton of research, more than I can process or digest. But there was this one study that came to mind as I was briefing with this team here that has just stuck with me for a while. It was around 2019. It was a set of interviews, actually, that the Boston Globe had done with some of the best and brightest graduates of Boston public schools, graduates from 2005, 6, and 7, I believe. Among the 90 valedictorians from Boston public schools, about a quarter of them aspired to become doctors after graduation. Guess how many of them actually fulfill that dream? 0. None of them. And one of the reasons this stuck with me, one, it's extremely humbling, both as someone in education and as a parent, but it's very telling in that academic achievement is only part of the student success equation. And our panelists here today, the reason I'm very excited to talk to them is, one, they actually work very hard to translate critical research to practice every day and realize that there's a missing piece of the student success equation that we too often ignore, and that is opportunity. We have a real opportunity gap that, what we've noticed, often sits at the intersection of both what students know and who students know. Our panelists today recognize that our networks contain value. They help us get by and get ahead. So to kick off, I'd like to invite each of you in a lightning round to please introduce yourself, your program, and the critical work that you're doing with your teams to center relationships as part of your system work. Daquan, would you like to kick off?
Yeah, go ahead. What's going on, everyone? My name is Daquan, founder and CEO of WeThrive. At WeThrive, we equip underestimated youth to own their future. Our youth are using web and mobile apps to begin solving a problem in their community. They sharpen that idea into a viable business plan, and then using the seed funding that we provide, launch a real micro enterprise, keeping the revenues, keeping the traction. We squarely target closing wealth gaps throughout the country. And as Mahnaz mentioned a moment ago, really are squarely targeting what opportunities are and are not afforded to everyone in this country. One of the particular opportunities we target is, one, who gets to participate in economic training and how early, right? We live in a system that basically tells youth, hey, when you turn 18, come talk to us, we'll do something meaningful in economic training. And so we really squarely target how do we get to that 11 to 17 demographic as early as possible. And two, how do we build social capital and teach that as a skill as well? And so those are the two particular things that WeThrive focuses on. We use entrepreneurship as this apprenticeship-based learning practice field to do so, but squarely targeting real-world economic training, and then also the ability to build social capital early on and build it as a skill.
Thank you. Nancy?
Hi, guys. I'm Nancy Soni, CEO and founder of PathMatch. I have a slightly different, maybe less traditional background. I spent 20 years building companies like Netflix, Amazon, Warby Parker, Bonobos. And over 20 years, I filled almost 10,000 positions and viewed over 4 million resumes. In that time, what I realized was social capital, your degree, your GPA, really doesn't matter. And yet that's all kids focus on or are taught throughout college. And so I had started and sold a company back in 2012 through 2017. And when I was looking at the state of the world and how I could actually build something more mission-driven, one of the things that really stuck with me was 50% of college graduates every single year end up unemployed or underemployed. And as a parent of a 12-year-old, soon to be shelling out quite a bit of cash, I think that is patently wrong. And so I built the early data science and personalization teams for Netflix, what content we are served, what TikTok says we should be watching. And yet, in our modern day world, we have nothing to help a high school or college student figure out what they want to do. So PathMatch is a career navigation network. We basically help college students select, so our app basically helps college students match to careers in the modern tech-enabled world based on their strengths, their interests, their goals, and their personality. And then our tech basically helps them select the right career, learn about matched companies, and then pre-skills them. And then they have their PathMatch profile where they get real-time analytics throughout college to learn how hireable they are. And so they're basically constantly able to manage their hireability score. So it's like a credit score for your career. And all of this flows into an open marketplace where employers can hire interns and new grads more easily than they can in our current infrastructure. I think you need to.
If I have your mic, will I sound as
Take
good
that
as you? There's magic in that microphone. I'm David Shapiro. I'm from Mentor. I like our moderator called it a lightning round, like be quick. Don't give nonprofit people a mic. But I work for Mentor, and Mentor is essentially the umbrella for youth mentoring in the country. It was set up a little over 30 years ago, and the idea was you needed the infrastructure of a mentoring movement in order to professionalize the field, translate research to practice, help people on-ramp into the field. What I would say is probably the greatest shift that maybe is most interesting for this conversation, at least to me, hopefully it will be interesting to you, is that what was initially all about building a field, so standards, training, and we could answer one question, which was how do you build an evidence-based mentoring program, which often served a low number of young people, sometimes scaled, but was harder to scale, has now become more about, or I would say that's still happening, but in addition to that, the question we're answering now more is how do you integrate relationship into solution? So into workforce development system, design schools to put relationships at the center as an outcome. And so more and more, that's sort of a design and integration challenge around not leaving relationships to chance. And so, that's a lot of the work that Mentor, and we have local affiliates around the country because context locally is everything when you're in the human relationship game as well. So thank you so much.
Speaking of the game, I feel like David just threw me a no-look pass on the designing schools around relationships. I'm Andrew Frishman, co-executive director of Big Picture Learning with Carlos Moreno. And for folks who had a chance to visit this morning to San Diego Met High School, it was one of the visits right here. There's 75 schools in the Big Picture Learning Network in the United States and a couple of hundred around the world. Our mission is to activate the power and potential of young people, schools, and systems through interest-driven real-world learning. There are three things that we really focus on, but I'm going to say relationships twice. First, we believe that young people need to be well-known. Far too many high school students, if you ask them about their high school experience, they'll say, I'm kind of bored, and nobody at the school really knows me, and I don't get to do the stuff I'm interested in, and it is not related to the real world outside that I'm headed out into. So in our schools, we set up really robust advisory systems so that young people get deeply known. And it's not just relationship for the sake of relationship. The goal is to get to know them so that you can know their interests, what they care about in the world and in their communities, connect them out into the real world for practical experience. And through that practical experience, they start to get to know a bunch of mentors in career fields, and those are the relationships that we come back to again. Mentors, we'll mention mentors. I think the last thing I just wanted to say on this is that we see really tremendous value in this happening not only at an individual student level, but really happening at an institutional level, where institution is school, is district, is written into policy. That's, I think, what we're about. It's both the individual and anecdotal, and also the absolute systemic and big P and little p policy.
Thank you. So as I'm hearing you guys, I'm guessing you're probably also noticing a core theme that's consistent, whether you're teaching young people about entrepreneurship or exposing them to career pathways or ensuring they have access to a trusting relationship or embedding internships and work-based learning through the high school experience are two things. One, all of these models are purposefully centering and integrating relationships as part of their program design. So if we think of school and district level strategic plans, it is front and center in writing, and that makes a difference. The second common theme here is that they are all looking at social capital as an outcome. So when we say GPA or graduating from high school as key outcomes, building relationships that young people have access to and can mobilize over time as their needs and interests evolve is building social capital. And when you position that as an outcome, you ensure that their success isn't limited to the classroom or the school they're leaving, but carries with them into college and into their careers. So thank you for highlighting that within your context. Now, given the scope of this conference, I'd be remiss not to point out the value of education technology. Traditionally, even in our own research, we see that technology serves two purposes. Either it's for content transfer or knowledge transfer, or for assessing students. But technology, ed tech in particular, can be extremely valuable for what we call strengthening weak ties. And this is a term we've learned in sociology research, the strength of weak ties. All of us have close relationships, our dear friends, our family, our spouses, our partners, who we often turn to for support and encouragement. But weak ties are those people you might not see very often, but you may turn to on LinkedIn when you're curious about a professional pathway or looking for a new job. And that is the strength of weak ties. They're plentiful, they're diverse, and they often carry new information. And I wanted to highlight, and perhaps Nancy and Andrew, you can take this one on. Can you share with the group how you amplify the power of weak ties through the use of technology in your work?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I built early teams at Snapchat, and a large chunk of what I've seen, having worked in the ed tech space for the last 2.5 years, is how college students, when you say, you've got to go network, or just go reach out to your alumni, like, get on LinkedIn. Well, nobody gave them a tutorial on how to use LinkedIn. They're terrified. Gen Z doesn't get it. And so part of our tech is actually how do we create tech that they're used to? So think TikTok, think YouTube, think Instagram, think Snapchat. How do we build ed tech to be similar to all of the other screens that they're on already? And then building into that through SMS or push notifications. Here are people that you should be connecting with through personalization and recommendation algorithms.
So I think one of the things that folks who visited the Met San Diego earlier today saw is that every single individual student, beginning right in 9th grade, is connected out to an interest-driven internship in the community. And so this idea of leaving to learn, starting with the assumption that maybe not all the best learning happens in the classroom. What about the radical notion that there's real-world learning that happens out there, and that if you're preparing for an uncertain and turbulent world, and you need to be able to thrive as an adult, that could happen situated out in the world, out in a workplace, to understand what you love about it, what you find challenging about it. And so that's what our schools have sought to scale. We think that every young person should have that opportunity. And about 10 years ago, I had been an advisor, an educator in the school, had been an internship coordinator, and we were growing a school from about 70 kids up to about 300 kids. And when you have 70 kids, you basically write every kid's name down on a clipboard, and you write every mentor next to them, and you just connect them. Once you get up over about 150, you need technology. This new innovation that was called Microsoft Excel and Google Fusion tables. But then we got to a point where we were starting to work with hundreds and thousands of students, and there just was not the sort of back-end infrastructure to run that. And so I was at the school at the Met Sacramento. One of our alumni is here today, Lexi Ortiz right over there, who now works for us. If you're looking for human capital pipeline, go back through your class lists and you can find people. But at that time, we were working to basically hack together a system. Over the last 5 years, we put together something called Emblaze. Some of our partners are here in the room who helped us with the software engineering and design. Thank you, Susan. And over that time, we've now built out Emblaze so that it's live in 150 locations, 30,000 young people who are engaged on it. We're really rapidly spreading and scaling it. And I think the thing that for us is most important is that what gets measured gets valued. And so when you can actually keep sort of quantifiable information about how many adults young people are connecting to, and I feel like we're plugging LinkedIn all the time, but if you can refer them out to LinkedIn so that when a young person who's interning at an architect's office or at a Head Start or at a biology lab finishes their day and their mentor says like, yep, they were here and this is what they did, and by the way, I'm gonna go endorse them on LinkedIn. I'm gonna give them some credit. That, I get, I'm here in Nerdville, so I can say, I get a shiver up and down my spine that the young person demonstrated a real skill and talent in that workplace, and an actual expert in that field validated that, right? That I think is what we're after, so.
Thank you, Andrew. And something else I really appreciate about all of these models is that this is not work being done to the students or even for the students. It truly is being done with the students. And I know, Daquan, when you and I were chatting earlier, you mentioned how when we're talking about building student social capital, there's a responsibility on the student, and then there's a responsibility on the employers or the adults interacting. Can you expand a little bit on that in your entrepreneurship work with them, what that looks like?
100%. So, one of the key things we look at, right, is this question of, what is social capital and what does it mean to teach social capital as a skill, right, that it is. There's a funny story I'm going to share about David, right? Mostly because I like telling funny stories about David, right? And so
There's so many.
So many. And so, we were first introduced by, another colleague, an individual we both in connection with, right? I founded WeThrive coming out of college, right? Now, that particular person was just a champion. They saw the vision of WeThrive, but we were super small, right? I'm a senior graduating college at the time. I kept in touch with that person. And then long story short, they introduced me to David. David gave us a ton of thoughts, ideas and frameworks around mentorship at the time when I was like, wait, there's an organization that does entire pieces around mentorship, right, graduating. And so there's a few things about this story I'll illustrate that's important about teaching social capital as a skill, right? Number one is this concept of long-term sustainability and relationship building, right? That individual who connected us, I had learned from, another set of mentors around what it meant to give consistent updates to individuals, to build authentic relationships and partnerships in ways that assisted us to impact WeThrive that much easier. That's one. Number two is this question around what do I not need to repeat, right? What can I lean on other individuals to learn from? And also along the way, right? Most common, we talk about this in relationship to things like how do I get an internship or a job, right? But these things are not unique just to career, but throughout all these different spectrums. And so that particular component is something that we believe in, teaching social capital as a skill. As I mentioned earlier, we use entrepreneurship as a practice field for this, right? And so our youth, they actually have conversations with professionals like yourselves, walking through very real challenges that they have, and then we challenge them to take a next step forward. They then send follow-ups. They have an agenda for that, and they have to send at least 2 different follow-ups for that particular piece as well. Right now, again, what we're looking to do is teach social capital as a long-term sustainability skill. These are things that as humans, especially as younger humans, we may not always know to do, or even that it can be done. And so that's one of the key things that we think about is mentorship is key, mentorship is important, and teaching that as a particular skill is also integral for that on both sides as well, in our conversation as well. And the flip side of that is then what is the role of the professional mentor when you're working with a young person as well, right? And we like to think that's to model and encourage and offer feedback. And so we then, of course, offer very tangible ways in which the professional can step in and encourage those things or provide feedback or even reach back out as well, right? Back to that long-term sustainability. So that's a little bit about it, but the key overarching thing, because you can go so deep in different ways, is how do we build around the contextual use case of the young person, especially when so many young people that we're talking about in Youthforce are coming from traditionally disenfranchised communities specifically, right? And so those particular communities are individuals where that social capital has been oftentimes removed or barricaded, right? And so we have a special piece around equity on how do we make sure that we actually offer balance.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a really critical differentiation I just want to echo is that we need to look at social capital as both an asset and a skill. And we're beginning to uncover different ways to measure that from just purely the quantity, the difference between the number of weak ties you have versus strong ties, as well as quality. Is there trust? Is there attunement? Are we actually supporting the young child or the student or the young adult in the way they need or in the way we want, right? There's the structure of the networks. And so I know with Emblaze, the mentors, the internship site directors get asked, who did you connect your intern with today? And that alone is a way to provoke them to say, did I actually do justice to this student and introduce them to everyone in our network in the office? And then that fourth dimension that Daquan referenced, social capital as a skill, that's young people's ability to mobilize relationships. So the mindsets, the confidence, the skill sets, There are many programs at the college level that teach first-generation students how to write a thank you email, and we take that for granted, and we assume all students know how to do that. And the reality is that our students don't, and they deserve that same coaching and training as we offer on numeracy and literacy throughout their K-12 journey. One of the things I've also heard a theme at this conference, and all conference actually, is we talk about research, we talk about practice, but we also talk about the importance of it eventually translating to policy. If we think about scaling, and two questions I actually get asked often is, can we scale connections, and how do we scale connections? And so, David, I believe like the Biden administration has been putting a lot of muscle and dollars around student social supports in the form of summer learning and community programs, and there's a name to it, right? There's a National Partnership for Student Success. It's something I just learned about. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, how this is possibly enabling us to center relationships and where this could take us from a scaling standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think money and muscle may be lacking, name it has, so we need some money and muscle. But the idea behind the National Partnership for Student Success and the idea that is sort of emanating at scale. First of all, for a long time, you've had people, and a lot of people have said this that are at this conference probably, but is this idea that relationships don't scale, which is not true, by the way. Relationships do scale. They're messy and they're human, and they have, cultural and racial divides that need to be crossed, and they require humility, and they require lots of different attunement, and they need to be surgical and precise, but they do scale, and they scale for lots of people. So one misnomer is that relationships don't scale, and that they always need to be a means to an end. Relationships, so kids will get to school, so kids will get a job. Relationships for a lot of us are just, they have value in and of themselves, and so they need to be an intentional outcome. So once we get past those two things of public and political will around relationships being deserving of being an outcome, and also them, being able to scale, then you get to this idea of the National Partnership for Student Success. It was really born of the obsession on learning loss and high dosage tutoring, of which there was nothing wrong with, and of which you can understand how people arrived there. But the idea was, first of all, in your workforce, I don't know about you guys, but people didn't say like, you're behind at work, let's go already, because there was a pandemic. And so there was some empathy around how we got through the workday. But with kids, when you think about it, and it tells you something about our response to young people, the idea was not your learning was disrupted, let's figure out how you're traumatized and how to work around it. The response was, you're behind, man. Like, we got to tutor the hell out of you to get back. Let's drill and kill to get you back. Like, I'm not saying everybody was saying that, but that was the number one thing you heard as a solution from all corners, well-meaning people, was high-dosage tutoring. And so the idea was, let's create a tutoring corps. And that got really popularized. And there were those of us who said, like, yes, there are academic needs of students, and we need rigorous academics as well. And yes, young people did not learn in as effective environments, and lots of their own life disruptions got in the way of learning, and teachers weren't prepared to deliver this way. But also, there's a student support element that is needed in terms of what interrupted your learning. What loss and trauma did you experience? How differently did you experience this pandemic from your classmates? How might you get back to the classroom and feel supported? And so there are lots of individual organizations, mentoring programs, communities and schools that does integrated student supports, big picture learning. There are City Year. There are lots of organizations that do kind of personalized student support, that make it possible for young people to have wraparound support in schools and deal with some of the non-academic barriers. And so this is an idea of, can we band together and scale together so that there's personalized student supports in every school, and there's a core around that. And we're not leaving that to chance of whether City Year enters a market or this superintendent is really good and believes in that. It's an actual outcome, and we're trying to scale it in schools across the nation. That's the vision. We'll see whether we can pull it off.
Yeah, what he said. I feel like that deserves some applause. I think I want to chime in there because I find the irony that there are people at conferences who say you can't scale relationships. What is happening at a conference? Like, what are we doing? Like this, what is happening right here is the attempt to scale a whole lot of relationships. I also want to point out that what's happening right now is literally the second is unfortunately what happens in too many conventional classrooms. Like, this is one of the least effective ways to learn. The way in which you actually learn is what happens in all the interstitial spaces of the conference. It's all the relationships that you're connecting. It's all that scale that's happening. And so I think one of the things that you're talking about, the way in which people have been affected over the course of the pandemic, I think about, like, what happens at big family reunions? What happens at block parties? What happens at houses of worship? You have lots of people across various generations and age levels spending some time together. And maybe the kid goes running by like, hey, you should be talking to your aunt. You said you want to learn how to fix trucks. Like, she knows how to do that. Oh, hey, you wanted to figure out how to guitar. You should go talk to your uncle, right? Like, those are the kinds of things that happen. And one of the things I wonder about is, like, how do you make school, how do you make that kind of connection? Like, how does that feel more like that? How are we, like, looking for young people and their interests, connecting them up with a bunch of additional adults? And I just want to say also that, you know, we talk about social capital and ways to measure it. There's that individual way of measuring it with an individual young person, but there's also a way of looking at it the way Robert Putnam does about social capital is about the richness of connection in an entire community and group. Right? And I think that's what we're simultaneously trying to talk about. There's a ton of research that the greater that collective social capital, the better the entire community does, right? So we're seeking to try to develop that kind of connectedness. And how do we do that? Like, what does it mean when you have young people connecting with older adults who have got some kind of interest that's shared? That would be mentoring, what he said, right? Like, that is that definition of that. Like, that's how we bring young people into the adult world, is to connect with those adults around shared interests. And that's what's been so painful over the last few years. That's why you feel this, like, buzz and electricity in these conferences, is that we haven't had those kind of serendipitous connections with other people to feel out if we have shared interests. And our young people who are in this particularly, like, plastic period of their brain are just desperately looking for that, right? And I think if we go down the road, if we go down the road on the, like, learning loss is the lead narrative, well, we better remediate that. Well, we need remediation. Well, we need lots of tutoring. Like, we're gonna squeeze out the opportunity for the human connection and relationship. So I hope that we don't head in that direction.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to risk squeezing some of that out right now because of my technical brain. There were so many little pieces in what Andrew and David just said that I'm going to kind of, like, codify a little bit. For those of you in the audience for whom social capital might be a new concept, and you might be thinking, well, where do we start? What does this look like in our context? I think there's, for better or for worse, social capital is not as simple as the definition, because there's this idea of different relationships. Right? So there's the value of peers, there's a value of families and how they engage with schools, there's a value of educators, there's a value of the community and administrators and all the people in the room. Then there's this idea of understanding what resources are flowing through those relationships. So we want to be mindful that we're not just putting all these relationships within reach. My middle schooler who started a new middle school during COVID pretty much, like, slammed me because I was like, you need to go talk to your teacher. You need to go ask a friend if you're not understanding. And he was like, Mom, I get what you do. I get social capital, but I don't know how to reach out to all these people, right? And I was like, oh, okay, well, you're a kid. You don't know, right? And so to even know that I could go to a high schooler who offers math peer tutoring, it exists, but often the kids don't know how to access it or they don't know it exists. So even as you're thinking about your models, thinking about what relationships are already available and accessible to our students that we're not maximizing, and what kind of resources do they need. In this space, we're talking a lot about internships and jobs. And Nancy, I want to kind of highlight kind of where you're coming in, is that career exposure, just understanding what's possible, is extremely important and continues as young people's needs and interests evolve. And so, Nancy, I just would like you to kind of highlight this idea of the type of relationships that could put into reach and this critical resource of career exposure.
Sure. So viewing the Valedictorian Project website, and it just really spoke to me. So for my own story, I went to college. I was pre-med all through college, took the MCATs, got into medical school, or applied to medical school, got in a car accident, spent a lot of time in a hospital, and realized, I don't know if I want to go spend the next 10 years of my life to go become that. And then went to the Career Center, and that's where all dreams go to die. Not really, but at least my dreams. And what I realized was they gave me, this is 1999, so pre-Google, they gave me this book of careers. And I think when we talk about social capital, you can't be what you don't know exists, right? And so the value and the beauty of internships is go try something. My trying something was being a patient at a hospital for a couple of weeks and realizing, crap, I don't like that. I wish I would have known that in high school, or heading into college and not having to go through 2 years of organic chemistry. So I think social capital is really important in that we want to be able to get to students as early as possible, to give them access, to give them knowledge of opportunities that exist, and then give them an infrastructure where they can go and try something. Try before you buy it, and go spend the rest of your life hating what you do. So there's another, Strata came out with a research article recently where internship, the value of paid internships. So the 29% of college students end up actually graduating with an actual paid internship, which is ridiculous, which is why I do what I do. But the value of that paid internship actually increases their earning potential in year one by $18,000 in annual income. So let's just start there, right? Like, that's crazy. And how do we democratize those opportunities? How do we actually help students understand, hey, it's not just go be a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, an accountant, a firefighter, or a policeman. Like, oh, by the way, there's plenty of other things. We need Netflix to make more shows about all the other careers that are out there.
Yeah, no, that's great. And sometimes just knowing what you don't want to do is as powerful. It's just as powerful. I had a mentor who was determined to get me to become an MD, and I was like, no, not happening. And that was a good thing for me to know. And so as we kind of close this out, each of you, I believe that our schools should be an engine for opportunity, right? And so while there is impressive work happening, there is still a lot of work left to do. And so if we can do another round, it doesn't have to be lightning unless you want it to be, David. And I won't make you go in order, but I think this is a really great opportunity for all of us to hear from you guys. What work should we be thinking about prioritizing? Where can some of us start? Where can we each play different roles in making sure that we are centering relationships in a way that outlasts the schooling experience and positions all of our students to really reach their potential?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in real quick. So, we're spending a lot of time talking about social capital, right? Social capital is a sport that requires agency, right? No one can build social capital if they don't feel that they're able to take action, that they're actually able to own relationships, so on and so forth, right? There are many times throughout our schooling where we do not feel like we are owning our educational experience, like we have any say in where we go. And that's one of the first things that we target, right? Earlier you heard me say something like, we have an educational and economic system that waits until we're 18, until we're able to do meaningful things in an economic prosperity. And that's the square thing that WeThrive tries to target, right? Is how do we re-engineer systems of economic development, such as to target 11 to 17-year-olds as direct participants in the economy. There are some easy wins that we're able to do on a district level. We work with districts like Buffalo Public Schools and District Public School and DC Public Schools as well to get those done. Something as simple as if students have the idea to sell on campus, are they allowed to? Right now, the answer is no amongst most school districts. Something as simple as that unlocks a world of economic opportunity, especially for those who are not going to get it outside of school. And then the second thing relative to that is supplying the direct catalyst for it, right? We look at that as seed fund, right? So earlier you heard me say that we supply that seed fund to youth when they're ready to launch. That has been demonstrated as well by our team that it could easily be owned by a school and school district as well. So those are the two things that at a systemic level, right, we're just talking about a school district, policy-wide, automatically catalyze that ownership of a young person to even feel safe in owning relationships and to start directing where that goes. So those would be the two things.
So I have two things. Number one is as a parent. Number two is in the world of what I do. Number one is I see education. Number one, educators have such so much to do, and it's not easy. But I also think that we force this idea that you have to be good at everything from K through 12. So you have to get good grades in English and math and social studies and history just to get into college. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm not good at like all of those things. And that has certainly not stunted my growth in my career. So that's number one. I think I'd love to be able to lean into helping students understand what their kind of locus of, what are their strengths, and lean into that and actually spend more time focusing on that. Then the other piece is making internships more easily accessible, helping students understand what opportunities are available. Technology has changed, radically changed the way we do everything in our lives, both personally and professionally, and yet I still talk to students who, females particularly, who are like, oh, no, I don't know how to code, so I can't work in tech. 60% of tech companies are people who don't code. And so it's being able to level the playing field in terms of understanding what's available and what's out there, and then making it easy for them to get there. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're being well behaved. We're going in order, even though you told us we could disrupt. I think if I had one thing, it would be listen to the end user. Like I would just listen to young people. Like when you listen to young people, they say they want relationships every time. So listen to young people, people that know them, people that see them, people that understand them, people that want to stick by them no matter how complex it is, and aren't in for some sort of rags to riches savior story, but just want to be there with them and learn with them and from them. So listen to young people, listen to the end user. Two, I would say, and I know this won't be particularly popular at this conference, but man, we love tools. And like, we can get better tools, but I'm not sure tools are our biggest problem. I think design, resources, and political will and public will are our bigger problems. Design for relationship at the center. Hold yourself accountable for relationship at the center. Get resources and public and political will to deliver on relationship. Tools are really important. They're the guts that allow us to deliver on that. If I thought all we needed was more mentoring programs, I would be in the tools game, and we certainly want there to be lots of quality mentoring programs. But that's the guts that delivers on the promise. And so we've got to create the will and the design around the promise for us. And just to put in one sort of plug that, because American Student Assistance has made it possible for us to be here, but also to do design work around relationship-centered schools. So we can meet schools where they're at, because this is a kind of design challenge that has to be customized for your environment, for your school's culture, for your community's culture. But at the end of the day, like, if we don't hold ourselves accountable for surrounding young people with relationships, I would go back to that valedictorian project, because I live in Boston, and one of the things they talked about was the soft bigotry of low expectations, which is often something we phrase as adults' expectations of young people, and that's not what it was in that project. In that project, it was the soft bigotry of low expectations of the students around whether adults would show up for them on campus. And so most of them left campus because they didn't think there was anybody there to help them with a 400-hour emergency, or to help them figure out how to balance work and school. And so we need to arm young people with the expectation that adults will show up for them. And unless that's happened throughout their life, it's not going to happen once they get into that situation.
What he said. I think I see time ticking down, so I'll try in the lightning round where I think lightning should strike. And I think that where lightning needs to strike is on big P and small p policy. But I am an insufferable optimist, and I believe that the challenges and problems we have in the education system are human-created problems. And like, we have built this cage that we live in, and we have the potential for human-created solutions to those. And I think that particularly over the last 2 years, prior to that, for almost 100 years, there was sort of a sense that, like, well, we've got to keep doing it that way because that's the way it's always been, and we've got to stay in compliance with all of these incredible regulations. And the reality is, no one was actually ever in compliance with most of those things. It's just not possible to do that. And what we saw with the amount of turbulence over the last couple of years is that that snow globe got shaken up. And it's really up to us to decide, do we want things to settle back to the way that they were? Or do we want to learn from what happened? And I think it's up to us to say it's not good enough to go back to normal when normal was not very good for a whole lot of folks. We've got to be going forward to better. And I think what we're hearing about here are all kinds of incredible innovative solutions. The future's there. We just need to spread it around a bit more equitably.
Thank you. And in the spirit of being insufferable optimists, I hope you will all join us in this work, in this journey of centering relationships, think about how we can do this more deliberately. Thank you.